Join Alex Cardinale as he discusses America's worst tragedies and emergencies. He will keep it real with you and share all the details about the emergency, how it could have been prevented, what we can learn from it, my thoughts and more. Tragedy can strike at any moment. Whether it's a fire, a medical emergency or robbery, we should be prepared for it. Learn from these common tragedies. Post your thoughts in the comments. Now here is Alex Cardinale.
Hello everyone, welcome to Keeping It Real with Alex Cardinale, where I break down tragedies that rocked and shocked America. Today I am going to be talking about a tragedy that happened over 3 decades ago. The tragedy that I'm going to be talking about today took place in the late 70s. More specifically, about today was a deadly nightclub fire that took place in 1977. And it took place on Memorial Day weekend in 1977. On May 28, 1977, during Memorial Day weekend, a huge fire broke out inside Beverly Hills Supper Club. The fire raged on for hours, and in the end, it claimed the lives of 165 people and injured 200 more. So the station nightclub fire had less deaths, and it was a smaller building. But the Beverly Hills Supper Club was a much larger building, which is why so many more people died. Plus, the Beverly Hills Supper Club was constructed in such an odd way that made evacuation in emergencies very hard. It was hard to escape that building, and that is what a lot of fire chiefs believe, that so many people died is because they could not get out of that building. And back in the 70s, buildings were constructed in odd ways, and safety was not in consideration when buildings were constructed in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So when fires happened back in that time period, a lot of people lost their lives because buildings weren't safe back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So today we're going to talk about this awful tragedy that happened in Kentucky. Now, the Beverly Hills Supper Club was a very popular venue. There were some awesome celebrities that performed there, and a lot of people liked going to the Beverly Hills Supper Club. Oftentimes, it was jam-packed, way over capacity, and that could be another reason that so many people lost their lives on that fateful day. So in 1977, my mother was 5 years old and my father was 12 years old. So this tragedy took place a long time ago, but it's still one that Americans remember and Americans talk about even to this day. So this is going to be a very memorable episode of Keeping It Real with Alex Cardinale. We have a comment from a live viewer. Thank you, Juan, for watching. And Juan says, By the way, love your fish keeping knowledge. Great storytelling. Thank you so much, Juan, for tuning in. I really appreciate that. So, today we'll be talking about the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire. I'm going to talk about first what the Beverly Hills Supper Club was, and then I'll break down the tragedy and the fire that happened at Beverly Hills Supper Club. I'll share my thoughts on this fire. And my last topic, something that I haven't done on any of my previous tragedy shows, I want to give some witness accounts. We'll hear from some survivors of this tragedy. And on this episode, we're going to hear from somebody that is considered a hero from the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire. He was only 18 years old at the time, but he was credited with saving so many lives. And we're going to see some of his statements from this horrific event. So, the Beverly Hills Supper nightclub fire is the seventh most deadliest nightclub fire in American history. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments as well. So, before we get started, I want to share some images of this fire so that we can understand the magnitude of this fire. And seeing that it's over 3 decades old, there is no video footage to show. So all we can go by is photos. So the first photo shows you that the Beverly Hills Supper nightclub was a rather large building. And with it being a large building, you would think there would be many exits for all the people inside to get out of. But like I said earlier, it was a weirdly constructed building. Ways out of the building were very difficult, so a lot of these people suffocated from the gas and the poison, and they lost their lives. An overpacked building with almost 3,000 people and over 160 deaths. The city of Kentucky, or state of Kentucky, was not equipped to handle so many deaths so quickly. So they had to set up a temporary morgue to house the dead bodies. And because a lot of the dead bodies died from smoke inhalation and poisoning, it looked like they didn't have any trauma, but a lot of them did die from the poisonous gases that was the cause of the fire. So another image of the Beverly Hills nightclub fire is another part of the building that is on fire, as you see here. And here's another image showing fire trucks and firefighters trying to put out this fire that went on for many hours. And lastly, here is an image of the aftermath of the fire. This is one of the rooms that was inside the Beverly Hills Supper Club nightclub. So those are images of this tragedy. So we're going to start this video or this show with the question, what was the Beverly Hills Supper Club? Well, the Beverly Hills was a major attraction. It was less than 2.5 miles outside Cincinnati, just across the Ohio River in Southgate, Kentucky, on US 27, near what would later become its interchange with Interstate 471. The club booked its entertainers from Las Vegas, Nashville, Hollywood, New York, and other show business hubs. So you got popular cities like Las Vegas, Nashville, Hollywood, New York. So you can imagine a lot of celebrities came to the Beverly Hills nightclub. Now, the site had been a popular night spot and illegal gambling house as early as 1926. Ohio native Dean Martin had been a blackjack dealer there. The club had reopened under the then current owners and management in 1971, and by the 1970s, it was considered an elegant venue that attracted top-notch talent and affluent clientele. So people that had a lot of money came to the Beverly Hills Supper Club to enjoy themselves and see top talent and rising comedians, great musicians at the time. So several additions had been built onto the original structure between 1970 and 1976, creating a sprawling, non-linear complex of function rooms and service areas. The building was really large and it did have some exits, but the building was constructed in such a way that you had to literally go through a maze to get out of the building. And in an emergency, such as a large, growing, fast spreading fire, that is that is a situation between life and death. If you cannot get out of a building when you have fire and smoke, your chance of survival decreases. And unfortunately, 50% of the people inside the Beverly Hills Supper Club, maybe even more than 50%, died because they knew they couldn't get out. Very, very sad. Along the central portion of the southern wall to the east of the building entrance was a small event room called the Zebra Room. A narrow corridor to the Zebra Room's east separated it from the Venison Room, and a series of service spaces which ran northward along the building's east wall. This interior corridor terminated between the garden room, occupying the central portion of the north wall of the building, and the cabaret room, which jutted out from the northeastern corner of the building. A smaller branching corridor led from the internal corridor to an exit door that sat between the garden room and the cabaret room. To exit the building from the cabaret room using that corridor, a person would need to pass through a set of double doors into the main interior corridor, pass through a single door between the main interior corridor and the branching interior corridor, turn a sharp corner into the branching corridor, and proceed approximately 1/4 of the length of the cabaret room to the single door that connected the branching corridor to the exterior of the building. That was a lot to read. So that just goes to show how big that building was and how hard it was to escape. This complex navigation was not typical for this type of building. A number of other event and service spaces were scattered throughout the rest of the building, with some rooms leading into each other, some leading into interior hallways, and some leading to the outside of the building. A partial second story covered approximately the southern third of the building, sitting above the main entrance, zebra room, and main dining room. It held two more small event rooms made of six smaller rooms, co-joined, collectively labeled the Crystal Rooms. Though the building's frame and ceiling tiling was classified as non-combustible, the Beverly Hills Supper Club made substantial use of wooden building materials, including floor joist for the two-story portion of the complex and framing on interior hallways. It was decorated throughout with highly flammable carpeting and wood wall paneling. Event rooms also used wooden tables and supports, as well as tablecloths, curtains, and a variety of other small combustible materials. The building did not have a fire suppression sprinkler system installed. At the time in the 70s, these were not required in venues such as the Supper Club. Also, the Supper Club did not have a alarm system or smoke detectors. In addition, the majority of the paths of egress in each event room led not to the outside of the building, but to a variety of narrow interior corridors and service spaces. So that is some facts about the inside of the building. And now that you have that picture in your head of how hard it is to get out of that building, let's talk about the actual tragedy. So we're going to talk about the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire right now, and then we'll also lead into the causes, the potential causes, and all that stuff about this tragedy. So here we go. The Beverly Hills Supper Club fire. On Saturday, May 28th, 1977, the Beverly Hills Supper Club was operating beyond capacity, largely due to the popularity of that evening's cabaret room show featuring popular Hollywood singer and actor John Davidson. Based on its number of exits, the cabaret room could safely accommodate about 600 people, according to the calculations of the fire marshal. But on this night, it exceeded capacity with people seated on ramps and in aisles. According to later estimates, based on seating charts and memories of those present, the number of people in the cabaret room at 9 p.m. on May 28th was between 900 and 1,300. Wow. If that building can only accommodate 600 people, imagine having 900 and being over 300 people capacity, being over 300 people. Then you add on 1,300, and that's way over the capacity. Regardless of the exact number each gives, sources agree that the room was well beyond its safe holding limit. And unfortunately, this could be why so many people perished. There is just way too many humans in that building for the amount of exits that there were. Elsewhere in the club, guests were eating gourmet meals. Later estimates placed the total number of people in the Beverly Hills Supper Club on May 28th, 1977, at approximately 3,000, substantially more than the 1,500 people fire code allowed at the time for a building with the number of exits the club had. So if you have way more people than 1,500, you're screwed. Near the south exit, close to the main bar, the opposite end of the building from the cabaret room, a wedding reception drew to a close around 8:30 p.m. in the Zebra Room near the building's main entrance. Some of its guests had complained of the room being excessively warm with loud explosions from beneath the floor, and the group left the building before the end of their allotted time. That should have been a red flag right there. The room remained vacant from their departure until a minute before 9 p.m. when an employee smelled smoke and opened the Zebra Room's door to confirm the presence of smoke. She asked another employee to call the fire department while she and others grabbed fire extinguishers and began trying to fight the flames. Though the employees were not aware of it, their opening of the zebra room's door allowed enough oxygen into the room to cause what had been a smoldering fire in the room's drop ceiling to flash over and begin to spread rapidly. It quickly became clear that fire extinguishers were useless against the fast-growing blaze. The fire department was alerted to the fire at 9:01 p.m. and arrived by 9:05. As they approached, firefighters on the first emergency vehicles can already see smoke coming from the building. As smoke began to escape the zebra room and drift down the hall towards other banquet rooms, guests and employees nearest to the zebra room smelled it. The employees began to urge room occupants to leave the building. However, as the sprawling complex lacked an audible fire alarm, those in more isolated rooms had no way to know that there was a fire in the building until an employee walked the length of the building, alerting them. Fire investigators later estimated that the fire, once it spread through the northern doors of the zebra room, took only 2 to 5 minutes to enter the cabaret room. As a result, news of the fire and the first sense of the smoke and flame reached the cabaret room, the farthest point from the zebra room, nearly simultaneously. By the time busboy Walter Bailey arrived in the cabaret room and interrupted the show to order evacuation at 9:06 p.m., there is very little time left for the audience of around 1,000 people to leave via the room's small number of exits. As it spread laterally, the fire also began to spread upwards, engulfing the spiral staircase that would have provided the best exit for those on the second floor of the building. Around 9:10 p.m., power failed in the building, extinguishing the lights. Panic ensued, and even those who had been calmly moving toward exits in the cabaret room began to push and shove each other. The situation was made even more desperate because of the 3 exits in the room. 2 were soon blocked by the fire, leaving the crowd to funnel through a single exit. Employees outside the exits attempted to pull guests to safety, but the crush of bodies as those behind pushed upon those in front became so solid that no amount of strength could free most of them. Many of those who escaped the crush blocking the northeast fire exit became lost trying to find other exits. The building's confusing design often led to a set of doors opening into a bar area that funneled frantic guests into a dead end. Firefighters alerted that the majority of the building's occupants were in the cabaret room, focused their efforts there. But even the combined efforts of every fire department in the county were simply too little too late, unfortunately. Temperatures in the cabaret room soared into the thousands of degrees, and even firefighters, weary and dehydrated, were soon unable to safely attempt any further rescues. A volunteer firefighter has been known to say, and I quote, "When I got to the inside doors, which is about 30 feet inside the building, I saw these big double doors, and people were stacked like cordwood. They were clear up to the top. They just kept diving out on each other trying to get out. I looked back over the pile of, it wasn't dead people. There were dead and alive in that pile. And I went in and I just started to grab them two at a time and pull them off the stack and drag them out. End quote. Bruce Rath, Fort Thomas Volunteer Fire Department. At 11:30 p.m., Fire Command, suspecting that the building's roof would soon collapse, ordered all firefighters to evacuate the building. At approximately midnight, the roof did indeed implode onto what remained of the building. The magnitude of the blaze was such that firefighters did not have the flames under control until around 2 o'clock that morning. Parts of the building continued to burn until May 30th, 2 days after the fire began. That's how large the building was. The building continued to burn for 2 days. By the early morning of May 29th, 134 bodies had been removed from the building and laid out initially on the hillside surrounding the building and then in a makeshift morgue inside the nearby Fort Thomas Armory. By the end of June 1st, 1977, 28 more bodies had been discovered, bringing the death toll up to 162. All but two of the dead were found in and around the cabaret room, with 125 clustered near the room's north exit and another 34 at the room's southern exit. Two bodies were removed from the vengeance room. A small number of fire victims died after being rescued from the scene, one on June 25th and one on July 2nd. The last victim of the fire, Barbara Thornhill of Delhi Township, died on March 1st, 1978, 9 months after the tragedy. This brought the number of verified confirmed deaths to 165 total. 165 people lost their lives on Memorial Day weekend, 1977, in what was a horrific tragedy. I could never imagine being in a large building as it's burning down, being confused because it's really difficult to get out of there because the building is constructed in such a weird way. My heart and my thoughts and my prayers go out to all the victims that lost their lives in this horrific tragedy nearly 40 or 50 years later. So very, very sad that this tragedy occurred. And a lot has changed. A lot has changed since this tragedy has happened. Now every building all across the world has to have safe exits. There has to be fire suppression systems in every building, thank God. There has to be fire alarms, and every building must abide by capacity limits. But as we found out on the last episode of Keeping It Real, the Station nightclub fire happened in 2003, and that one was also way above capacity level. Now, a lot of people argue about the cause of the fire. Some people say that this fire was arson, and I am certainly not one to argue that it wasn't arson. I just don't know. I have not studied or researched why arson would be a reason for this fire. Who would have something against the Beverly Hills Supper Club? That's another show in its entirety that I could do. Was it really arson? But from the investigation into the fire found the following deficiencies: overcrowding. Although seating charts recovered from the club after the fire showed that the cabaret room, the largest facility in the club, normally held between 614 and 756 people, a hostess who had worked at the club for several years estimated occupancy on the date in question to be well over 925. The investigation also found that there were inadequate fire exits. Full occupancy of the entire complex was estimated to be roughly 2,750, which under Kentucky law would require 27 and a half exits. The club had fewer than 17 exits, many of which were not clearly marked nor easily reached. Some exits could be reached only by passing through three or more interior doors and corridors. Faulty wiring. Governor Julian Corral's report on the fire called the club's wiring a electrician's nightmare and alleged multiple wide-ranging code violations. Bridgetown electrician James Ament, who inspected the fire site at the request of a local attorney, Stan Chesley, a year and a half later said, "I cannot believe that any of this was ever inspected." Lack of firewalls. This allowed the fire to spread and in addition allowed it to draw oxygen from other areas of the complex. Poor construction practices. The club had been built piecemeal with inadequate roof support, no common ceiling space, and highly flammable components. Extreme safety code violations. There was no sprinkler system and no audible automatic fire alarm. Poor oversight by regulatory authorities. The local volunteer fire department is said by the Inquirer to have known of the deficiencies, but by law at that time did not have the authority to compel corrections. Those are all possible causes of the fire. Unlike the station nightclub fire, there is actually no known cause. There are only estimates of what could have caused it, and there are only surmises of what could have caused it. Now, people do surmise that arson is a big cause of this fire because they thought the mafia might have been involved in this, because I guess the mafia tried to buy the Beverly Hills Supper Club and it got turned down. So maybe they felt, well, you know what, we'll burn this place down. But I don't know if that really could be a possibility. You never know, though. But anyway, it was a really horrific tragedy. 165 people died, many others seriously injured. Up to 200 people were seriously injured. Just a terrific, horrific tragedy. And to this day, people lost parents, people lost their kids, people lost loved ones. Very, very tragic event. And my heart and my thoughts and prayers goes out to all of the victims. So my thoughts on this crime, or not crime, sorry, my thoughts on this tragedy, a horrific tragedy, and one that we can use in the future to educate about fire safety. I think when we sense that there is a fire or any red flags that there might be a fire, action should be taken immediately to exit a building. That will increase your likelihood of survival. Also, buildings should be constructed with safety in mind. Exits should be clearly marked so that people can exit the building. Very, very sad tragedy. And it's one that I was kind of debating whether or not I should talk about it because it's sad, but I figured we should talk about it because it's nearly more than 3 decades old, and people can still learn a thing or two about it. Back in the 60s and 70s, safety was not a priority, but now it is, thankfully. So those are my thoughts on this horrific tragedy. Hopefully, we'll never have a huge fire like that again, where more than 150 people lose their lives. And the city that the Beverly Hills Supper Club was in was not prepared for over 150 dead people. They had no morgue set up, so they had to use a nearby military base to store dead bodies. And people were actually looting. They were taking these dead people's possessions, whether it would be their purses with money or their wallets with money. People were caught taking items from them. And it actually happened at a news broadcast of this fire. I saw that on YouTube and I was like, what the fuck? People were actually stealing from deceased victims. That's how cruel some of our citizens of the United States of America can be at a time of a tragedy. Very, very sick. But on that note, on the time of a tragedy, other Americans can be considered heroes because they'll risk it all to save other people. And that's the part of a tragedy that I like to focus on. People that do heroic acts, they don't think of themselves, they think about saving other people's lives. And that brings us to a witness account of this tragedy. And this witness account is a man by the name of Walter Bailey. Now, on May 28, 77, Walter was only 18 years old, and he was a busboy. Walter Bailey is the most iconic hero of this tragic day. The 18-year-old Beverly Hills busboy was widely credited with saving hundreds, if not more, with his decision to bypass reluctant superiors and interrupt the warm-up act to John Davidson in the cabaret room, the Beverly's Grand Performance Hall. A jam-packed and dressed-up audience had no idea of a problem, and Bailey himself was not positive the fire would spread from the spot where he had seen it. But acting on gut instinct, he grabbed a microphone from a performer and warned the crowd to seek the exit. The just graduated Campbell County High School senior went on to Northern Kentucky University, where he earned a degree in economics, and he has lived the last 25 years in Greater Dallas, Texas, working in finances. But we're going to talk about Walter Bailey on the day of the tragedy. And I'm going to read some quotes that Walter Bailey gave in an interview because he is our witness account for this tragedy. Walter Bailey said, "Normally, I didn't work the cabaret room, but I asked to work it that night. I had heard an ad on the radio talking about how funny the comedians working there were, and I wanted to work there and maybe be able to catch some of the show. And they said I could. I started about 1 or 2 in the afternoon and was just working the setup, arranging the tables, putting out water and butter, things like that, normal restaurant work." He would then go on to be quoted saying after the fire had started, he would say, "When the meal service in the cabaret room was over, I was heading out and a supervisor started talking to me about how overcrowded it was. He had 20 or 30 people still waiting to get in and be seated for the show. Then a waitress came up to me and asked where the shillings were. And then she leaned into my ear and she whispers, 'There is a fire in the zebra room.' And then she was gone. I thought she was surely exaggerating, but I ran down there, and when I started to open the doors, I noticed some smoke coming out at the top, and down the center between the doors. I decided not to open the doors any wider. To me, there was pressure in there I could feel. It seemed like a major fire, possibly the whole room. At that point, I turned toward the main bar, and in there it was normal. People sitting at the bar and around tables. And I ran to the entry and yelled in, "Everyone out, there's a fire." When I did that, the people at the bar stools pushed away, and people at the table started standing up. So I turned again fairly quickly and ran back to the cabaret room. I went back to the supervisor and said, "We need to clear the room. There's a fire in the zebra room." He was looking down the hallway, and I guess he didn't see anything, and he just stared at me. "Don't say a word," I repeated. "We've got to clear this room now." I didn't know why he was just staring. I turned and I thought, I've got to go get one of the shillings. But after I went about 10 steps down the hallway leading to the kitchen, I realized I can't do this. Other people, including that waitress, are already looking for them. So I went back to Charlie and said again, "We've got to clear the room." He said, "Watch my line for me." After a couple of minutes, I see him headed toward the cabaret room service bar. I'm thinking he's going to check that exit and make an announcement. Meanwhile, I had gotten the people from his line outside into the garden area. I told them to stay there, and I headed back to the cabaret room. I was expecting the crowd to start coming out, but still nothing. I'm standing at the curtain at the entrance, looking at the show going on, and I'm getting really anxious. They're not clearing the room. They haven't made an announcement. This can't happen. This room has got to be cleared. So it is at that point, Bailey said, at this time, there was still no smoke in that area. I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I thought he, the supervisor, would announce something. I saw the comedians on stage and they're holding mics and telling jokes. And I think to myself, I can get one of those mics and get this room cleared right now. So as I walked through the room, I thought, I've got to have the right thing to say. I can't start a panic. First, point out the exits, then tell them to leave, and then tell them there's a fire. I climbed on stage. I appear in front of the comedians, and they look at me, and I went toward the one on the left, reaching for his microphone. And to my surprise, he handed it to me. And I turned toward the audience and said, "I'd like everyone's attention. If you look to your right, you'll see an exit. If you look behind you, you'll see another exit. And in the left corner, you'll see another one. We need everyone to leave the building. There's a fire in the building." Keep in mind, all I had seen was smoke coming out of the doors of the zebra room. I had done all of this on my own accord, and suddenly I was concerned that maybe it was nothing and that I was probably not going to have a job anymore because I had just cleared a room where people had tabs of $100 or $200 or more. I was taking a chance. But as I went back toward the zebra room, a wall of smoke came barreling down the hall. I'll never forget what an amazing sight that was. This was a large hallway with high ceilings. I just turned around and got back in line and tried to go against the flow of people. And that is Mr. Bailey. And Mr. Bailey is credited with saving the lives of hundreds of people from his quick thinking. So Walter Bailey is an American hero from this tragedy. He saved the lives of possibly more than 100 people. So thank you, Walter Bailey, for doing everything that you did. All right. and that is the Beverly Hills Supper Club night fire. My thoughts and prayers go out to all 165 people who died in this horrific tragedy. Let's take a brief moment of silence, please. All right. I would like to thank you for tuning in to this episode of Keeping It Real with Alex Cardinale. I hope you learned a little something about the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire from May 28th, 1977. Our next tragedy that I'm going to keep it real with you about will take place on September 11th, 2022. And on that day, I will talk about the tragic events of 9/11, 2001, and that is the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center and America. So next Sunday, right here on Keeping It Real with Alex Cardinale, here on the legendary Alex Cardinale YouTube channel, I will talk about the 9/11 attacks 21 years ago. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, the legendary Alex Cardinale, for future episodes of Keeping It Real with me, Alex Cardinale, but also for more positive, upbeat videos where I do cooking and baking videos, aquarium videos, wrestling videos, and more. So make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, the legendary Alex Cardinale. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching. Peace out, everybody, and stay safe.